Hey everyone, welcome back. So it is pouring rain outside. You may hear that in the background. And so it's obviously very much fall and heading into winter here. And I have a friend who lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who loves biscuits and gravy. And he's always talking about biscuits and gravy. I'm Canadian. I don't understand the love of biscuits and gravy, maybe the way that they do out there, but I have been curious to see if I could make a vegan version of that. I do have a really good recipe for mushroom gravy that I will share next, but today, right now, for this recipe, we're going to make the biscuits. Okay, this is my second attempt at making these biscuits. The first attempt did not work out. I was using a different recipe that just didn't do it. So I'm going back to the traditional one that I have used in the past. And I am going to show you the ingredients and then show you how I make them so we can get this biscuits and gravy sorted out. Okay, for our biscuits, we're going to need a little bit of sugar, some apple cider vinegar, you could use lemon juice as well, some white all-purpose flour, a little bit of non-dairy milk. I'm going to use up the rest of this silk oat and coconut half and half, some salt, some baking soda, some baking powder, and some butter. I'm going to use the Earth Balance cooking sticks, and you need a quarter cup of that, so I'm just going to use half of one of the sticks. A bowl to mix everything in, and then a parchment paper lined cookie sheet. We're going to put everything in a big bowl. I'm going to use, I have this, I'm not sure what this is called, pastry cutter, I guess. I happen to have one, so I'm going to use that, but you can use a fork or two knives to cut up your butter into the flour as well. And obviously you need measuring cup, measuring spoons, both dry and wet. 2 cups of white all-purpose flour. One tablespoon of baking powder. The full recipes will be down below. 1 tablespoon of baking powder, a half a teaspoon of salt. I've learned the hard way not to measure my salt over my bowl. You can imagine why. All right, and then 1 teaspoon of sugar. So 1 teaspoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of baking soda. So we have both baking powder and baking soda in here. And then, did I say preheat your oven to 400 degrees? Preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And then, to have everything, all the dry ingredients, yes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my vegan butter in there. And I'm just going to cut it up into it. I don't know if that makes sense. I'll show you what I mean. We'll be cutting it into the flour as well, but I find, by the way, my hands are clean, that if I do this, it makes it a little bit easier to cut it up in there. And now we're just going to cut up the butter into the flour mixture so that it's, I mean, I've always heard it described as like there's little pea-size chunks of the butter in the flour, just so it's crumbly is what you want. If you didn't have one of these things, you could just take some forks or knives and just sort of crisscross them in there. You could probably get in there with your hands as well, but you don't want to melt the butter. All right, should be good. Now, I'm going to measure out 1 cup of this half and half. You can use any non-dairy milk, unflavored, unsweetened. So I'm going to do 1 cup. And I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of the apple cider vinegar. You can also use lemon juice. that a good stir in there. Okay, now grab yourself a wooden spoon and, excuse me, add in the non-dairy milk. Now you don't want to over stir this, but you do want to make sure that all of the flour is mixed in. I think I'm going to add just a little bit more. Just a little bit. Now, I'm not going to roll this out. I'm going to do these as drop biscuits, but you can, so that's why I added a little bit more moisture, but you can definitely roll this out on a floured surface and then cut biscuit shapes, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to grab that cookie sheet that we've lined with parchment paper. Make them whatever size you want. I just find scooping them is so much easier than rolling them out. And the more you handle the dough, the more it's going to, the butter's going to warm up. And you really don't want that. So this is my preferred method, but obviously you should do whatever you like to do, you're used to doing with your biscuits. Oops. Not doing a very good job of spacing these suckers out, am I?
Whatever you do.
Yeah, the first recipe I tried just didn't work out. I was trying a recipe where you actually don't use, you don't cut up butter into the recipe. You use like a full fat cream. And I thought I could try it with this Silk Half and Half at 10.5%, but it just wasn't enough fat content in there. And I think that's why they didn't work out. So I am going to use the traditional method of actually having butter in there. And that earth balance works really well in any recipe where you need to use a stick of butter. I have found that it works really well in those recipes. I'm going to put these in the oven at 400 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. You're just going to have to check on them. It really depends on your oven and your altitude, all of those things. Let's get these in the oven and I'll show you what they look like after. Now it's time for the gravy portion of the biscuits and gravy, and these are the ingredients that we're going to use. We're going to use a small onion. I've got a pack of cremini mushrooms. This is 200 grams, 7 ounces. It'll add up to about 2 cups-ish of sliced mushrooms. If you don't like mushrooms, just make it without, I suppose, but you know, it's kind of what makes this gravy. So cremini mushrooms, or you could use button mushrooms if that's what you've got. We need a little bit of flour, some olive oil to saute the mushrooms and the onion. If you are oil free, just use water. And then my favorite too, onion and garlic powder. And then you want a veggie bouillon. You can also use a plant-based beef bouillon. I do have that. In fact, I think I'll use that instead. Okay, so I have my frying pan on. I'm going to turn that to a lowish heat. And I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil in here. And I'm going to add the onions. And on a low temperature. And just let those start to soften up as I get the mushrooms unwrapped. I don't normally buy pre-sliced mushrooms, but these were the same price as the other ones, so in the interest of laziness and just trying to get this done, I did. So we need that, and then we need a 1/4 cup of flour. I'll just get that measured out. That will thicken the gravy. So I'm going to let the onions cook a little bit before I add the mushrooms. I always add a little bit of water when I'm sauteing onions and I want them to get soft, and I want to make sure that I don't burn them. So I add a little bit of water to them. So now I'm going to add the mushrooms in here. And I'm going to let these cook down a little bit. They're going to release some moisture as well. I'll break up some of the bigger ones, bigger pieces. That's why I like to buy my mushrooms whole and cut them myself, because I usually cut them in smaller slices than they come in. But this works. So I'm just going to cover this again and let the mushrooms cook down a little bit. Now's a good time, while the mushrooms are softening, to add your onion and garlic powder. We're going to add a teaspoon of each of them, or to taste. Again, not onion salt or garlic salt powder, because the bouillon that we're going to use is going to have obviously a lot of salt in it, and we don't want to have this too salty. So what you want is for the majority of the moisture to have cooked out of the mushrooms. And once that's done, then you can add your flour. Now it's going to get really dry, really gummy. Don't worry about it. What you're just doing is basically toasting off the sort of floury taste of the flour, if that makes any sense at all. So it will get all gummy and want to stick to the bottom of the pan. That's okay. Just stir it around so all of the flour gets a little cooked. I guess I should have probably put it that way, because once we add the liquid, it'll be fine. Trust me. This is the same way you make a white sauce, when you just saute onions in a little olive oil and butter, and then you add the flour, and then you would add your non-dairy milk. And then if you were making mac and cheese, you could add grated cheese, whatever cheese you want to use in there, and that would make your cheese sauce. That's just basically a roux, is the fat, olive oil, butter, and flour. Okay, so now that that's done, I have 1.5 cups of water here that I have dissolved the bouillon cube in. It's not fully dissolved, doesn't matter. And I'm going to pour this in here. And I will likely add additional water. Where's my whisk? There's my whisk. For now, I'm just going to start with 1.5 cups. Ouch. I'm just going to whisk this. Turn this to a lowish temperature and whisk until the flour dissolves into the liquid. And that's your gravy. Now you just let it cook, let it simmer on low until it gets how you like it. Taste it. You can add whatever spices you want. I'll probably add a little bit of pepper in here. And that's it. That's as simple as it is to make your own gravy. When I started eating vegan, when I stopped eating any kind of animal products, I thought gravy would be the hardest thing. Well, no, actually, I thought cheese would be the hardest thing. But it was really intimidating for me to think about how to make a gravy without, droppings from some sort of roast or chicken or something like that, bacon. But this is super easy and is delicious. So I'm just going to taste this. I'll probably add a little bit more water. Ooh, that's good, if I do say so. It's not too salty, which is really nice. I'll add a little pepper to it. And I think I might add another 1/2 cup of water, because I want this to simmer and I don't want it to get too dry. You know how thick you like your gravy. And for those of you who live in biscuits and gravy country, or countries. I'm not sure how thick the gravy's supposed to be that goes on there. So, because like I say, it's not really as much of a thing here. I've never had it. I've never seen it on a menu, but I'm sure it exists. Don't get me wrong. It's just not something that we eat a lot of. At least I never have. So I'm going to let that simmer. I think I'm going to add a little bit of parsley. Just seems like the right thing to do. Add whatever you normally like, and add to the gravies that you make. How do we plate this up, guys? How do you guys eat your biscuits and gravy? I'm going to just take a biscuit, let it cool off a little bit, but then take it and break it in half and scoop some gravy over top. Okay, let's give this a try and see if my attempt at making biscuits and gravy is good. That's really good. The biscuits are actually really good. Much better than my first attempt. Well, my last attempt. It's not my first attempt at making biscuits, but it was my last attempt for this. My first attempt for this recipe. I think, yeah, definitely better. And the gravy is excellent. Please, please, please give this recipe for gravy a try. For mashed potatoes, anything that you're making that you want gravy on. So good. I kind of get now why biscuits and gravy is a thing, why people like it. It's delicious. I understand that you actually serve this with other things. It's often a breakfast food, but it's not something that's really big where I live, but it is delicious. And I think when you add the mushrooms in there, it gives it more of a meal sort of feel than just sort of a side. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you try it. I'll have the recipes linked down below, and I will see you next time.